So in this part, we're going to cover a little bit of DSM-5. So what is DSM-5? It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, often known as the DSM. It's a reference book of mental health and brain-related conditions and disorders. The American Psychiatric Association is responsible for the writing, editing, reviewing, and publishing of this book. The number 5 attached to the name of DSM refers to the 5th and most recent edition of this book. Original release was in May 13, revised and edited edition March 22. TR means text revision because there's the new ones coming out. So why do we get into the DSM-5 all of a sudden? So the DSM-5 is a pretty good contrast to most of the things that we've been going through, and it's really an interesting book to explore a little bit, to just see if, I won't say anything applies, because depending on your traumas and depending on your situation, it might differ, which is normal. But the purpose of this is treating any health condition, physical or mental, is accurately diagnosing the condition. That's where the DSM-5 comes in. It provides clear, highly detailed definitions of mental health and brain-related conditions. It also provides details and examples of the signs and symptoms of these conditions. In addition to defining and explaining conditions, DSM-5 organizes those conditions into groups that makes it easier for healthcare providers to accurately diagnose conditions and tell them apart from conditions with similar signs and symptoms. So there has been a lot of work that went into this book, and if you go and cover it, it goes into like 3 sections. First one is a section covers how medical professionals should use the book in their work. Section 2 is largest in the book. Each chapter covers a type of condition with the specific conditions defined and explained within. And the section 3 is emerging measures and models. The section contains information about specific assessment tools, which provides use as guidelines for diagnosing some conditions. It also has information about how cultural differences may affect a diagnosis, and a chapter about conditions that may eventually go into a later edition. So chapter 2 and section 2 of DSM and all of that has multiple things in there. For example, the neurodevelopmental disorders, autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and learning disorders. There's also the schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. As you can see, there's a lot, including phobias and panic disorder, anxiety disorders. Depends on what you have. Obsessive compulsive and related, trauma and stressor related, dissociative, somatic symptoms and related, feeding and eating disorders, elimination disorders and their sexual dysfunctions, disruptive impulse control, gender dysphoria, substance-related neurocognitive, personality, sexual, other mental disorders, medical-induced movement disorders, and other adverse effects of medication, other conditions. So basically DSM-5 is, in case you have, like me, been exploring yourself and some things do not necessarily add up, DSM-5, like recent one, is pretty good at just checking what may apply, you know. Of course, you leave it to the professional, because if you do sense that you have some issues, highly suggested to go to the professional and actually getting professional to check it for you. But like me, if you have been trying to figure out most things by yourself, you can try seeing it, the book it is, and checking what might apply. And if you are able to self-assess some things about yourself within this, you know, spectrums and disorders, I would suggest you just to go and see what could work for you, basically. So it's still quite something. So besides that, as we all have our bugs, you know, in our heads, and we try to sort ourselves out. Once again, I'm not a professional of it, but if you do want to see if anything applies, if you have anxiety, if you have, you know, depression and everything else, or like me, autism spectrum, which you discover years later, because you're like, oh, bugger, that actually adds up to such and such, and that's actually how it expresses. So that's that. Next, after the DSM-5, a good topic would be prefrontal cortex and hormones. So our prefrontal cortex does a lot for us. It's associated with cognitive control and decision making. Research suggests that children with neurodivergent conditions may experience a slower maturity rate in the prefrontal cortex. This could affect cognitive control capacity and potentially result in amplified emotional sensitivity. So basically, for those who might have neurodivergent aspect, some studies showed that apparently for us it's actually a neurological thing where the brain develops in later stages of life. So if typically prefrontal cortex develops by the age of like around 25, 27 for neurotypical people, for neurodivergent it actually is later in life. And I was like, oh, so that slaps. Thank you. And it made me think about how even still I do take some things quite emotionally, and besides all the triggers and everything else, it's quite hard to make decisions. And cognitive control decision making, it impacts a lot because when you have been under mental issues and disorders and everything else, and you're a neurospicy person, it takes you a while to realize what's up. And especially if you had a very dysfunctional family, it takes a while for you to find yourself. And for most of us, it happens later on in life. So when we start to understand what's going on, we try to get into it like in later stages. For me, it started to more happen like after the age of 25. It began in like 28 plus. Me in my 30 something right now. So it gives me understanding that basically maybe it's not still created until the end, the prefrontal cortex, and the decision making is still might be impacted by the surroundings and the people around me, and I might take a bit too much of environmental impact on decision making, and or divert myself from what I actually need to do, because some things might seem that I do it for myself when in actuality I might do it because that's an expectation of somebody else. But it takes a bit of a stop and assessing the situation of like, what do I want? Because you kind of like stop to dig a little bit and say like, oh, but these people told me this, and my partner wants that, and my friends want this, and they think this is like the best way for me to, deal with certain situations. And as you leave out all the friends and family and partners and whatever, out of the equation, and you are left with yourself, and you start to literally think about like, yeah, but what I want, what do I want? That's when it starts to kind of differ from the expectations people kind of like put on you, and you start to kind of like be a bit more about yourself. And that prefrontal cortex is also like about the maturity that you gain, that kind of like hits you in a sense. As I don't know, like I was never aware that people could be like disregarding the public opinion so much, and I was thinking that, oh, everybody takes in account everybody's point of view, and they're trying to like mitigate kind of like whatever choices they make to kind of like more or less benefit everyone. And with the years, I understood that that's not the point. Some people do their decisions based on like what do they want and their personal preferences and what they think is best for them, and not the expectations of others. And to me, that was something new. That was kind of like the news, because at first I thought that was very selfish, and only with years did I understand that it's not being selfish, it's being respectful towards yourself and setting boundaries with, like, with the rest of the world. But that's that. So there's also the limbic system. Includes amygdala, associated with emotional processing, and hippocampus, involved in learning and memory. Differences in the limbic system may impact emotional regulation abilities. For example, autistic children may have heightened amygdala activity, which results in increased emotional response and elevated levels of anxiety. So we're a bit more emotional with dealing with stuff, because it's not that we're just like randomly emotional, we just take into account a lot of variables, and that just kind of like adds up and builds up, and we get overwhelmed with all the stuff. And especially if you had trauma and there's like something triggering you, and on top of triggering you, you have to make a decision that's not kind of like in the healthiest of ways to deal with, mixes up. So there's the prefrontal cortex. So one of the biggest differences researchers have found between adults and adolescents in the prefrontal cortex. Apologies. This part of the brain is still developing in teens and doesn't complete its growth until approximately early to mid-20s. The prefrontal cortex performs reasoning, planning, judgment, and impulse control. Necessities for being an adult. Without the fully developmental prefrontal cortex, a teen might make poor decisions and lack the inability to discern whether a situation is safe. Teens tend to experiment with risky behavior and don't fully recognize the consequences of their choices. A bit more bold action taking, not necessarily thinking like, oh, it has consequences, more like, let's wing it, it's gonna work out. I think we've all been there. On the other hand, in adults, the frontal cortex is completely developed. They are able to process and organize information. Adults who are emotionally and psychologically healthy are able to judge risky behavior and factor into decision-making the consequences of their choices. Teens might rely more on their amygdala, the part of the brain dealing with emotions, whereas adults rely more on their frontal cortex, leading to balanced thinking and behavior. In fact, another part of the brain that is still developing are certain neural networks of brain cells that link the prefrontal cortex to regions of the brain that are less about reasoning and thinking and more about emotion. So sometimes, depending on how neurospicy you are and how much trauma you had, you might, I wouldn't say disassociate, but kind of like have your thinking brain separately from your emotional side. And when you experience emotions, you kind of tend to be more logical about it and overthink it and try to be more kind of like reasonable and try to brain understand it instead of feeling it. And apparently that's bad for your health. So if you have been overanalyzing your emotions or your feelings, and you've been kind of like thinking, and not necessarily feeling, apparently that impacts your health, not in the best of ways. And like it takes a while to learn to feel the emotions, especially if you if you have been deprived of it or never told about it or taught how to, and what are the emotions. Because even I've met, me myself, and in general in life, I've met some people who, just like me, overanalyze their emotions, and instead of like feeling them, they were just like thinking. So this is what I feel. This might be the case, and and like all the emotions were bottled up, and we would not let ourselves feel the emotions. So that would process into like back pain, actual physical health problems. And apparently that's all related. So if you have certain emotions you have been suppressing, and you have not been releasing it, like anger, sadness, anxiety, that builds up in your system. And that apparently also adds up on your physical body. And when you start expressing those emotions and releasing them, there's like a huge difference in your physical body even, because most of our anxiety is stored like up top. So it's like muscle tension, you know, it's like feeling of the weight of the world on your shoulders all the time. So that's anxiety apparently. And I kind of never felt it before, like, or thought about it before until like I started to read up about it. Same with anger, which is mostly in the gut or like the heart, it kind of like tightens up. And when you express it, when you kind of like shout in the woods or you go into like, you know, smash room or something and you break stuff, it kind of gets you to feel way lighter afterwards. So that's like, oh, so that's what I needed. So for those of you who have been storing all the emotions in your body, I suggest you to release that stuff, because apparently that's not good for your health physically, not just mentally and emotionally, just physically as well. So that kind of like has a chain reaction in between it, which I too discovered as I was researching the stuff. So factors that influence a teen's brain. There are some environmental and generic factors that can affect the teen's brain development and overall health. In fact, certain factors can contribute to mental illness, such as addiction or a psychological disorder. These factors can include drug use, genetics, trauma. So as children grow, their ability to engage cognitive control systems to regulate emotions, reduce amygdala activity, and stimulate activity in lateral prefrontal regions significantly increases. Autism is a complex developmental disorder that involves atypical brain organization starting early in development. Individuals with autism often experience a period of rapid brain growth in infancy and early childhood. This accelerated brain growth is linked to an atypical pattern of connectivity between brain regions. Several studies report that alterations in brain circuitry involved with social interaction and attention can be detected well before symptoms of autism can appear. So, children with autism may struggle with identifying and interpreting emotions in themselves and others, leading to difficulties in emotional regulation. Additionally, children with ADHD may have heightened emotional impulsiveness and intensity, compromising their emotional regulational skills. Understanding this complex emotional regulation process, which involves managing both negative and positive emotions, is crucial for a deeper appreciation of neurodivergent children's emotional experiences, including adults. So, cultivating safe space, building emotional literacy, modeling healthy emotional expressions, employing mindful techniques, endorsing social regulation of emotion. So, social cognition, communication, and emotional sensitivity. So there's a lot going on with all of that, and kind of like the prefrontal cortex and the part that kind of like takes care of all the assessment of things. It also impacts how we perceive things, see threat or otherwise, and get our decision making going and do the things we do, sort of. So that's that. And then to hold this, you know, science part, there's hormones. So what are hormones? Chemical messengers within the body. As messengers, they travel through the bloodstream to tissues and organs to help them work properly. According to Hormone Health Network, hormones work slowly and can affect a number of different processes in the body. These other areas are growth and development, metabolism, sexual function and reproduction, and mood. Men and women have same hormones. However, each gender has varying hormone levels based on their needs. Due to this, men and women experience different problems when it comes to deficiencies. So, besides our brain doing the thing, and besides our traumas and our neurospiciness doing the thing, we also have hormones. And hormones also affect our body. So if there's hormonal deficiency, we might be prone to do a bit more, kind of do things a bit more differently, or be on edge, or feel a certain way, because hormones is what it like impacts a lot in our body actually. And as I read through it, so there's a difference in a sense. So the primary female sex hormones are estrogen and progesterone, which means men's primary sex hormone is testosterone. However, women do produce small amounts of this as well. Similarly, men also produce small amounts of estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen is the main female hormone, with most being produced from the ovaries and small amounts from the adrenal glands and fat cells. So that a lot impacts us through puberty, menstruation, pregnancy, menopause. Estrogen affects the brain, cardiovascular system, musculoskeletal system, urinary tract, and even hair and skin. They also explain that the other main female hormone prepares the lining of the uterus for fertilized eggs, supports pregnancy, and suppresses estrogen production after ovulation. Signs of hormonal changes in women. So one of the things I did not understand before, and had to understand with times, is one of the things that affect us is the hormones. So if we have, here it says like most common signs of transitioning to menopause include mood swings, irritability, difficulty sleeping, night sweats, hot flashes, weight gain, changes libido, vaginal dryness, brain fog, fatigue, muscle weakness, body aches, headaches, cravings. And there's also this part with, with male stuff, which testosterone helps men with puberty, penis and testes size, facial and body hair, sex drive, sperm production, fat distribution, red cell production, maintenance of muscle strength and mass. So, for instance, if men are low in testosterone, their symptoms can include decreased mood and energy, loss of muscle mass and strength, decreased facial and body hair, erectile dysfunction, loss of sex drive, and anemia. So, there's a lot of deficiencies that are there, and basically a deficiency in some certain hormone can cause us to feel a certain way, and or be a certain kind of like type of way, and we would not necessarily understand it straight off the bat. And having, for example, going to the doctor, a specialist who specializes in hormones, and checking the hormone levels, like that kind of helped one of my friends, because she was like very moody, she was very tired endlessly. She was like forever headaches, forever like, cranky, and she could not feel like she's good at anything, and like it was all bad. But then she was suggested to go to the hormone doctor, and she went, and that resulted in her seeing that there has been imbalance in things. So after she went to hormone therapy, like it all balanced that, and she felt way better, and she kind of changed genuinely overall. So how hormone deficiencies are diagnosed. Here it's like from the, copied from the hospital website, but genuinely. Thyroid hormone, sex hormones, adrenal function for men, testosterone levels, prostate evaluation, adrenal function. So each one having too much estrogen, for example, can increase the risk of certain cancers, and is linked to symptoms like depression, weight gain, difficulty sleeping, headaches, low sex drive, anxiety, and menstrual problems. Having too little estrogen can cause weakened bones, osteoporosis, menstrual problems, fertility issues, and mood disorders. While estrogen levels naturally decrease with age until menopause, some conditions may cause low estrogen in women who are not yet perimenopausal. Progesterone, key part in the menstrual cycle. Okay, so low progesterone levels can cause heavy and irregular menstrual periods and fertility problems. If progesterone levels drop during pregnancy, it can cause premature labor or miscarriage. Then there's testosterone. So contributes to sex drive, fat distribution, male strength, muscle strength, bone mass, and red blood cell production in both men and women. Women who have too much testosterone may have thinning hair on their heads, excess body hair, facial hair, acne, more body fat, low libido, and smaller breasts. I feel like I literally called myself out on this one. Having high testosterone can also cause irregular periods and contribute to fertility problems. Then there's insulin, regulates blood sugar. While body cannot produce or process insulin correctly, it can result in insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, or diabetes. So there's that. And there's cortisol as well. So has many responsibilities to keep you healthy and energetic. Cortisol is responsible for helping regulate metabolism, blood pressure, acting as anti-inflammatory, and even forming memories. Cortisol is sometimes called a stress hormone because the body secretes high levels of cortisol as a reaction to stress. Having too much cortisol for extended periods can cause hypertension, anxiety, sleep loss, and autoimmune problems. Too little cortisol is associated with low blood pressure, weakness, and fatigue. So that's that. Growth hormone, so stimulates cell growth, I kind of remember this one thing. Do apologies, but somebody told me that cortisol, if you get food or supplements with cortisol more, it actually helps you with, I wouldn't say treatment of, but have a lesser percentage of having dementia and like brain problems in general in later on in life. Not sure if that's scientifically backed anywhere. Do correct me if that's true or not. So there's a lot of things that just genuinely impact us, from brain to hormones to prefrontal cortex, Jesus, to amygdala. And some people have even attributed some mythical powers to amygdala. Might be true, might be not, but that does regulate a lot because it takes kind of like over the emotional parts of us. But then again, if the amygdala is too big, it means that we get too emotional too quickly and we get snappy, and that would not be way too great. So also like a way to check for hormone levels and see what can be applied. But I guess that's also like one of the parts that is there. So let's go to the next one.